Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Benzi.
Hi,
Hi.
Robinson.
Hi.
Hi, Benzi.
Hi, Larry.
I was thinking about last week experience. I think we don't have enough bandwidth to have videos.
Brachos. Every bracha we have was composed by the men of the Great Assembly of the Anshe Knesset Agdola. I mean, we have certain cases where the Gemara has machlokas about what the proper text was, but for the most part, the Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly, made much of our tefillah. Obviously, like we know that there's difference between Ashkenaz and Sfard, so there were certain parts like those were probably not composed by the Anshe Knesset Agdola. Rav Leo Kita was saying that the Anshe Knesset Agdola established a fixed text for the Hagaddah, which included various brachos and prayers. So therefore, by the time of the Mishnah, because the Anshe Knesset Agdola started before the era of the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah. So by the time of the sages of the Mishnah, there was pretty much a fixed text for much of the Hagaddah. Over the course of time, additions were made to the basic texts from very midrashic sources. After the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, certain changes were introduced based on changing circumstances. He says that would be the statement before we eat the korech sandwich. We say this is what Hillel used to do in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so that clearly was added. Also, part of halach ma'anya, that we say right at the beginning of Magid, before the 4 questions, that we say this year we're here, the next year in the land of Israel. He feels that was also from that time, and probably the songs of Nirtza were probably added later. So that's what he says. It's from that, we'll see in a few minutes, but the story of, not the story, but in the Hagaddah, right before Dayenu, we have a few paragraphs after we mention the 10 plagues. We have Rabbi Yossi Haglili says, how do we know that the Egyptians received 10 plagues in Egypt and 50 at the sea? And those paragraphs, Rabbi Eliezer says, every plague that the Egyptians received in Egypt really had 4 parts to it. So really they had 40, the 10 makos, which we say is 10, was really 40. And at the Yam Suf was 5 times as much, so it was 200. Rabbi Kiva said that each plague in Egypt had 5 components, so the 10 makos were really 50 makos. And then the Yam Suf was 5 times as bad, so it was 250 makos. And then we say Dayenu. So from the fact that there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Kiva, that couldn't have existed by the time of the men of the Great Assembly, because they weren't alive then. So the Rambam doesn't have that, the Abarbanel doesn't have that. So it seems that was a later addition that perhaps some of the Sephardic sages didn't have, because the Rambam and Abu Dram were both of Spanish Sephardic origin. The Rambam obviously eventually moved to Egypt, and Abarbanel had to leave Spain, but they both have their roots in Spain. Along that note, the famous Mishnah of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who said, "Behold, I am like 70 years old." He also didn't live in the time of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, so that couldn't have been in that original Haggadah either. Also, some of the drashos that we say. So when we read the parshas of Bikurim, Rami Oved Avi. So there's 2 pshatim in Rami Oved Avi. One is that my father was a wandering person from Aram, meaning Avram Avinu, and then he went on to Egypt. The other pshat in what is Rami Oved Avi, that means that someone who was from Aram, meaning Lavan, wanted to destroy my father, that he tried to destroy the Jewish people before they were a people, with whether it was the fights between Rachel and Leah or things like that. So we're not exactly sure when those drashos were composed. So some of them may have already been composed by the time of Anshe Knesset Agdola or not. But just to know, some of these texts we know are from time of the Mishnah, which would have been after the time of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So right now, before we go on, I'm going to just unmute in case anyone has a question. You can ask a question. If you muted yourself, you probably have to unmute yourself also. Any questions right now? Okay, so we will continue. Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin in Moed in Balacha, festivals in Halacha is what it's called in English. So he mentions that that the text of the Hagaddah is very old. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, because they argue so a lot of our Haggadah is from Mishnayos in Arvei Psachim. So we know that the Mishnah was officially compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, which was a little bit after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. But even though that's when it was finalized, there are obviously parts that were not changed, that certain teachings had been taught and accepted throughout Klal Yisrael before the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So there's a machlokas in the Mishnah and the end of the last chapter of Pesachim about an argument between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, and the Mishnah of Rabbi Gamliel, the famous words Rabbi Gamliel says, whoever does not say these three things does not fulfill his obligation, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. So those are already from the time of the Mishnah. So we know that those are almost 1,800 years old at least. Obviously, the part of the bracha at the very end of this, before we drink the second cup, that being a bracha that was probably, Reb Zevin doesn't say this, but it was probably composed by the Anshe Knesset Agdola because they composed their brachos. And what's actually very interesting to note is that that bracha, I'll just read it in an English translation here. So that's right before we drink the second cup. So after we say the first two chapters of Halal, which itself is a machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, so that was from the time of the Mishnah. Bless you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors from Egypt, and enabled us to live to this night, to eat on it matzah and maror. So Hashem, our God and the God of our fathers, may you enable us to live to other festivals and holidays which will come, to meet us in peace, happy in the reconstruction of your city, and joyful in your worship. May we eat there of the offerings and paschal sacrifices, whose blood will reach the wall of your altar for acceptance, and may we thank you with a new song for our redemption and liberation of our soul. Bless you, Hashem, who redeemed Yisrael. So I think it's important to note here that this is, I think it's highly unlikely that this is exactly the same text from the Anshe Knesset Agdola. For the reason is that the Anshe Knesset Agdola lived in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. They had a Beis Hamikdash at that time. And this bracha is clearly written for Galus, or when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, because we only say to eat matzah and maror. We don't mention Pesach, and we're asked in it that Yerushalayim should be rebuilt. Well, we don't say Yerushalayim should be. Well, yeah, we should be happy with the building of your city. So, probably so what I want to say about that. Look in any siddur in Shachris and Marav, there's something that maybe we take for granted. If you look in the siddur right before Shemona Esrei in the Art Scroll, regular weekday, it's on page 96. After Shema, we have a paragraph that starts Ezra Savoseinu, the helper of our forefathers. So we thank Hashem for a lot of things. We say that it's true that you are the master of your nation and the king, the mighty king, to fight their battles. It is true that you are the first and you are the last, meaning Hashem. There's no time without Hashem. There's nothing before Hashem. Nothing would be after Hashem. Besides you, there is no king, redeemer, or source of salvation. You redeemed us from Mitzrayim, Hashem our God, and you redeemed us from the house of servitude. All of their firstborn you killed, and your firstborn you redeemed, meaning the whole Jewish people, called because B'ni B'chori Yisrael, the whole Jewish people is God's firstborn. And you split the sea, and you drowned the wicked people, but the dear people you crossed over the sea, and the water covered their enemies. Not one of them wasn't saved. So some translate that everyone but one was saved, because Paro himself may have survived. Because of this, those the beloved will praise you and raise your name up, and your beloved ones will give songs and other types of songs and praises, blessings and thanks to the God who is alive and existing, high and exalted, etc., etc. And that bracha ends, Gal Yisrael, he who redeemed Yisrael. So every morning, and in Marav also, the bracha of Gal Yisrael is also thanking Hashem for redeeming us. So Kriya Shema, because the last chapter of Kriya Shema, we talk about, we mentioned the parsha of Tzitzis, because at the very end it mentions that Hashem took us out of Egypt, and the Gemara says that we have to, and that's from the famous Mishnah of Rabbi Gamliel, of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that he didn't know what was the source to mention the Exodus every day and every night until he learned the drasha of Ben Zoma. But because we mention at night, the whole bracha after Shema in Marav is also Gal Yisrael, Hashem redeemed Yisrael. And the paragraph that starts Ve'emuna Kalzos, we say Hashem, there's no one behind, he's the God, and there's our God, and there's no one besides him. We are his people. He redeemed us from king. He delivers us, redeems us from all mean people. He pays back our enemies. He exacts retribution to all of our enemies. He does great things to no measure and wonders beyond count. He puts our souls to life, and he doesn't let us, fall into trouble or death. He leads us over our enemies, and he brings us up against over all of those who hate us. He does miracles and revenge against Paro, great signs and wonders in the land of the sons of Ham. That means the Egyptians, because the Egyptians were descendants of Ham, the son of Noach. And with his wrath, he smote all of the firstborn of Mitzrayim, and he took Yisrael, his people, from them for a permanent freedom. And he passed his sons between the slots, or the passageways of the Yam Suf, because that's based on a medrash that when the sea split, there were different passageways. And those who chased after them and their enemies, they drowned in the depths. And his sons, meaning the Jewish people, sons and daughters, saw his might, and they praised and thanked his name. And they accepted his kingship over them. And Moshe and Bnei Yisrael sang a song to him. And we quote a little bit from Az Yashir, and then we say at the very end, that as the pasuk says, because Hashem has redeemed Yaakov and redeemed him from someone stronger than him, blessed are you, Hashem, Gal Yisrael, the Redeemer of Yisrael. So really, this bracha in the Hagaddah is very similar to the bracha and Gal Yisrael in Shema, and Shachris and Marav. Every day we thank Hashem for redeeming us, and the text that we say at the end of the second cup of the Hagaddah thanks Hashem for that, but it's also looking more to the future, that we should have one more new redemption, and so that's just something that's important to point out. I'm taking a little bit too much time here, so the other gist of what Rav Zevin mentions in the festivals in Halacha is that certain texts of the Mishnayos we know are obviously from a very long time ago, so they're very requirements. He mentions that the Gaonim, so the Gaonim lived in the time a little bit after the Gemara, but before the Rishonim, so let's say between the years 700 and 1000. They wrote very strongly against those who didn't include the drashos of Chazal. So when we already mentioned the verses of Arami Oved Avi, my father was either from Aram who was wandering around, or Lavan who was from Aram wanted to destroy my father. So you have to we read the midrashim on that. Now, normally we say medrash, we think of story type medrash, but there's also halachic medrash. So we talk about the halachic medrash on those psukim and connect those to using the psukim in Shemos about the Exodus. So those are very, so in the time of the Gaonim, now it's a little hard to believe, but even today there are some Samaritan shuls in Israel, even in the Old City. So the Samaritans who they keep the Torah literally, they don't reject the Chazal. So it seems that there was, even in the time of the Gaonim, they had a lot of trouble with them. So they said, someone who refuses to say those parts of the Haggadah, you have to throw them out of the community because they're heretics. So Rav Zevin shows how that part is also very important. So with that in mind, I want to just give an explanation in well, let me just let's stop here for questions in case anyone has questions. If anyone has a question right now, please ask. Hello, Canada.
Hey, Benzi, how are you?
Good to see you.
It's good to be seen.
Good.
I'm always home.
Okay. So no questions, so then I'll go to the last part of the share. Okay. Okay, so right before the four sons, we have something that's a little bit seems out of place, or what it's doing there. So we say Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, blessed is God. When God is also known as Makom, the place. We use that because the world is in His place. We say that to mourners when they're sitting Shiva. Blessed is He. Blessed is He who gave the Torah to His nation Israel. Blessed is He. And the Torah spoke for four sons: the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the son who didn't know how to ask. So what do we get from that that sentence or two about blessed is Hashem, blessed is He, and blessed is He who gave Torah to His nation Israel? So Rav Yosef B Soloveitchik, the uncle of our Rav Moshe, he answered. I don't want to go into his explanation. Rav Moshe in previous years has elaborated and disagreed on certain parts of his answer, but he says that every morning we make a bracha when before we there's a Birkas Hatorah. It's Asher Kiddushanu Mitosav Yitzvenu La'asok B'divrei Torah V'harevna Hashem Elokeinu, etc. We thank Hashem that commanded us to be busy, to be osek in words of Torah. So Rav Yashabir said that the mitzvah of saying over Torah of Hagaddah needs its own special bracha. So he gave a reason why. It was based on the fact that part of the Hagaddah is telling the story, but also to the wise son, the Chacham, we tell him all the halachos. So because there's a special halacha of teaching these halachos, it needs its own bracha. I want to give a different, but using his general approach that this is a Birkas Hatorah, I want to offer a different reason why we would need a special Birkas Hatorah on the Hagaddah. So as we mentioned, that it's important for a father to tell his son, or a parent to tell a child, or colleagues to tell each other about the story of Mitzrayim. And we know from the end of Avadim Hayinu that whoever can expand and expound and be lengthy in talking about the story and about praising Hashem is very praiseworthy. So there obviously is a lot of room to use a football analogy, to audible and to add other things into the Haggadah, in your telling over of the Haggadah. But there are definitely certain parts of the Haggadah which, if you don't say them, you do not fulfill your obligation. I spoke about this a couple years ago, and it's in the newsletter about the prisoner's Haggadah, and I'll just recap some of those ideas very quickly. Obviously, we have to say the Manishtana, we have to say Avadim Hayinu, that we were slaves. We have to mention also that originally our forefathers worshipped idols. That's talking about Abraham's parents, or the parents of Rachel and Leah. Lavan was clearly someone who worshipped idols, because in the Gemara there's a machlokas that the Mishnah says we have to start the Hagaddah by talking about our disgrace, but end up with our praise. So there's a machlokus in the Gemara if that means our physical servitude, that we were slaves and then Hashem freed us, or that we originally weren't monotheists and then we became a monotheist and believe in Hashem. So there's definitely, and we paskin that we have to say both of them. The Avudraham actually suggests that in the time of the Gemara there were two different texts. Some people had the Hagaddah that only focused on the physical servitude, and some only focused on the spiritual enslavement. But nowadays, we for probably 1,500 years, but at least 1,000 years, we do both. So it's a requirement to say that. We mentioned that from the time of the Gaonim that it's a requirement to mention these psukim of Arami Oved Avi and all the drashos that talk about the whole story, that how terribly oppressive the Egyptians enslaved us, but then all the miracles that Hashem did for us, and He freed us. We spoke, Dayenu is actually not one of the most important parts of the Hagaddah. As I mentioned before, the Rambam doesn't mention it. The Hallel is essential. If you don't say the Hallel, you don't fulfill your obligation of Hagaddah. If you don't mention Rabbi Gamliel's statement that you have to say Pesach, Matzah, and Maror and explain what is the significance of why we eat them on that night, you don't fulfill your obligation. The brachos you have to say. In fact, the Vilna Gaon had a very interesting opinion. The Vilna Gaon said every bracha is a mitzvah. Obviously, it's a rabbinic mitzvah, but the Rambam says that, the Vilna Gaon says that the Vilna Gaon says that there's 64 mitzvos on the Seder, and all the brachos. It's a lot of discussions how you get to 64. We tried to figure that out several years ago, and I think the most likely reason is that you could say there's Hallel itself is up to 45 blessings, because there's many different praises, verbs of praise of Hashem that we use. So for each of those praises might be its own mitzvah of Hallel, and so because there are so many terms, so you can get up to 45. That's what I think. And then last week, I found that Rabbi Yashiv's son-in-law, Rabbi Zilberstein from Bnei Brak, he has a list, and he tries to say how so many of the things, certain things he counts as a mitzvah 3 times. To eat the karpas, to make the bracha on the karpas, so he comes to 64 from a different way, but it's an interesting calculation how the Vilna Gaon gets 64. But to say a bracha, all the brachos, especially according to the Vilna Gaon, are essential to the night. So if we analyze what we have psukim that we have to mention, verses from the Torah Shabbat. We have to say the drashos of them. Drashos definitely are oral law. It's machlokus rishonim if it would be considered Mishnah or Gemara. According to most rishonim, it probably has a status of Gemara, whereas according to the Rambam, any set text of Chazal is only a Mishnah, and then our own expounding and expansions are definitely part of oral Torah, and according to the Rambam would fit Gemara. So there's 3 sections of Torah. When we say a Birkas Hatorah, the Gemara in Brachos tries discuss it. There's different opinions. If you say Birkas Hatorah only if you're going to read verses of the Torah, psukim. Some say even if you learn drashos. Now the drashos of that is even though they're oral law, but they're based on the written law, on the psukim. Some say even Mishnah, so that's oral law, but it's more removed from the psukim. And some say even Gemara, and the Gemara ends up saying you learn any of them, you need to say Birkas Hatorah. So any day, whichever part of Torah you learn, even if you don't learn all the parts of Torah, you have a Birkas Hatorah. But I want to suggest that part of the Hagaddah, we discussed when are many of the parts of the Hagaddah from, and who instituted them, when they were instituted. But I think the Hagaddah is something very unique in Torah, that it has all the parts of Torah are required to be discussed within the context of the Hagaddah. written law, because we have to mention psukim, oral law. It's interesting to note that according to the Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Kuf Tezvav, brachos have a status of Torah Sheba al Peh, oral law. They used to not write. They didn't have any benchers or sidurim in the time of the Mishnah. So because it had a status of oral law, and they didn't write down the oral law yet at that time. So because of all these requirements, if you didn't use all of these different elements of Torah, written Torah, oral Torah, all these things, you don't have a fulfillment of Hagaddah. So this isn't the way Rabbi Joseph B answered it, but using his answer, I want to say the reason why you would need a special Birkas Hatorah for Hagaddah is because the obligation to teach or to study and to teach the Torah of Hagaddah is a different magnitude even of the regular Birkas Hatorah, and that's why we could have a special Birkas Hatorah for this night, for the Hagaddah. So may preparing for Pesach and studying these things allow us to always come up with new ideas and authentic ideas and hopefully truthful ideas that will help us understand what happened at Yetzias Mitzrayim more. We'll be able to appreciate the Hallel, the praising and thanks to Hashem that we give at the Seder more, especially this year that we've all been sheltering in place. We have more of appreciation for what it means to be enslaved. So hopefully we can appreciate Pesach even more this year. Okay, so that was the Hagaddah share. So does anyone have any questions on that? I unmuted people, so if you have a question, you could ask.
For Hallel, why don't we say a bracha in Hallel? I know Rabbi Soloveitchik once talked about it, but I didn't fully understand his reasoning.
Yes, so there's lots of many answers given for that. Some say, according to the Sephardic minhag, that we say Hallel in Shul, which we have Sephardim in Shul say it. Obviously this year that's not going to happen because we're not going to have Shul, unfortunately. But the bracha that you say on that Hallel counts on this Hallel also. The most famous answer from the Rishonim is Rav Hai Gaon says that there's two types of Hallel. Sometimes Hallel is thanking, and sometimes Hallel is spontaneous praise. So normally when we say Hallel in davening, we're commemorating an event. It's an anniversary of a Yontif or whatever. So when we're declaring Hallel, we have to make a bracha. But on Pesach night, because we have to view ourselves that we just left Mitzrayim, when we just received this great gift from Hashem of freeing us, we just have to spontaneously say Hallel. If we would say a bracha, it would show that it was like, it was like a prepared speech. It wasn't spontaneous or authentic. Lahavdol, when I was in fourth grade, my fourth grade Rebbe told us a story once that Ronald Reagan, when he was president, he once said he was at some type of fundraiser for some event, and he said, I am so touched and moved by everything I saw here. The speech that I prepared is not adequate, and he ripped up the speech in front of everyone, and then he gave a great speech. And then later they found that he had the same speech. It was taped on the stender there, so that he did it just for show, but to show a spontaneous reaction. To say the bracha would take away from an authentic, spontaneous thinking of Hashem for the miracle that we just experienced. Does that answer your question, Larry?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a practical question.
Yeah.
About Tanis Bechoros. How can I do it?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Any other questions about the Hagaddah or anything that I said? No? Okay, so just I'll talk, I guess, about some announcements for this year only, or for this year due to what's going on. So first of all, Ramosha would like to give a Hagaddah share on Sunday morning. I think it's morning. Abba, is it in the morning, did he say, or in the evening?
Yes, probably, yes. Yeah.
So we're going to try to get him a hookup like this for him to give a share his Hagaddah share, we'll let you know before Shabbos the time, and if it's Zoom or if it's going to be a Google Hangout or something, how you can get that.
Mhm.
All koshering, anything that's a gathering has been canceled. So if you need to kosher things, you have to kosher them yourself. If you need any advice of how to do it or halachic things about it, please ask me. If you bought new stuff, the mikvah, the Kela mikvah is closed because people were gathering. They had a one person limit. Obviously, it wasn't working, so the Rabbanim closed the mikvah. So what the CRC has been doing is, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach once had a thing. Basically, you're declaring it ownerless, so only something that's owned by Jews that needs the tefillah. So in the mikvah, so you're declaring it ownerless. So that it doesn't have an obligation to be toveled. So for that, if this only works if you already have something. If you're thinking of buying it, you have to buy it in order to declare it ownerless. So they're having you say it in front of a beis din on Zoom like this or a conference call. So the CRC had one on Monday, and Rabbi Reese said 150 people called in. They're going to have one on Friday, April 3rd at 10:30 a.m. I'll send this information out, but another one on Monday, April 6th at 10:30 a.m. where there's a call-in number and there's a text. You say, my name is so-and-so. I hereby declare that all the food-related utensils that I own that required tefillah in the mikvah, but I haven't been able to tovel that, they're ownerless, and the beis din will use a power of a beis din hefker beis din hefker to say that it's hefker, and then that's okay. And then when the mikvahs are able to be, the Kela mikvah could be reopened, then it could be yours again, and then you take it to the mikvah. So that's a special situation about tefillah. Now the search for chametz. And any questions about that? Okay, then the next thing is that we search for chametz on Tuesday night. There's no change of how we search for chametz. The problem is on Wednesday, we're not going to have any burning. I know that Rabbi Posner at Chabad the village of Skokie was going to give him some type of permit to do burning. He's not sure that they're actually going to do burning. So we paskin that you don't actually need to burn the chametz. It has to be disposed in a way that it's not that it's destroyed. So, for example, when Pesach starts on a Saturday night, we do burning on Friday, so we don't forget. But we're still allowed to eat chametz even up to Saturday morning in that situation. So anything that you have left over, hopefully you don't have that much to have, and if you don't finish all of it, you can crumble it up and throw it down the toilet or something like that. So this year, you don't need to have a ton of chametz left over. You do put it in the garbage. If you want to do more, crumble it up and either put it, on the street so the squirrels and the birds could eat it. But other rabbis have recommended not doing your own beer chametz. The main reason is they're worried that it may not burn completely, because I guess they have experts at the regular beer chametz to make sure that it all burns. So you have to destroy your chametz, and which includes putting it in the garbage by 11:30 is the latest time. So don't. It's actually 11:34, but don't go up to the
Finish line.
the deadline there. And also remember to please say the kol chamira, you're relinquishing all ownership over. Even if you don't have any chametz to destroy, make that kol chamira at 11:34 on Wednesday. Now, in regard to
the garbage cans belong to village of Skokie, right?
They do, yeah. So some people say that you shouldn't. There's actually there's a case of someone I actually know. He was in a northern suburb somewhere that he used to put his garbage can in front of his neighbor, and they sued. And I think the neighbor sued him, and he ended up winning that he's allowed to put his garbage can in front of his neighbor's house on garbage day. So yeah, technically you can put your garbage can in your chametz into the garbage can. I know for our block, it gets picked up on Thursday, which is after Pesach starts, but we throw it out, and it's in the village garbage can, and we don't care for it anymore. Then for the fast of the firstborn, because there isn't, we can't gather. It's better not to do a siyum like this, and we know we cannot have a minyan through this. Yeah, when we have an assembly of Yisrael, to have a minyan, you need to have 10 people in the same room. So the siyum isn't the same as a minyan, but it's better not to do Zoom. So I recommended people to try to make a siyum on something. We recommended reading through the book of Shoftim because it's kind of interesting and it's a book of Tanakh. So you can make a siyum on that or any other Gemara that you want. I will do a Zoom siyum. So if people want to do the Zoom siyum, contact me and I'll give you a link for the siyum that I'll make on Wednesday morning for the fast of the firstborn.
So is it better to do your own, or is it better to?
Better do your own.
But you're doing it anyway if people want to participate?
Doing it anyway for people who can't do their own for whatever reason.
Okay,
so go ahead.
Is reading the book of Tehillim considered that you can make a siyum on it? If you study the whole book of Tehillim, that's good. The thing is that when you, let's say you study the book of Shoftim, you know what's going on. Tehillim has a lot of difficult words, and it's hard to know exactly, if you just read it in Hebrew, to know exactly what's going on. So when I say you learn Sefer Shoftim, I was just recommending Shoftim as an example. You read it and translate, you know what's going on. Tehillim, it's 150 chapters, and some of the words are very difficult. So there's nothing wrong with any book of Tanakh. Now the Megillos are not really individual books, and let's say something like Yonah, which is only one chapter, but Yonah is one of the 12 minor prophets, and the whole 12 minor prophets is considered one book. So just Yonah itself isn't a full book. And then if you have to read all 12, it's a lot of chapters and some difficult stuff there also. I mean, again, if you want to learn all 12, that would be a book of Tanakh, and you can make a siyum on that. And how do you do a siyum by yourself?
Well, you study the whole thing, and then you read the last thing, and then you made the siyum, and because you completed learning book of Tanakh like that, so then that's the siyum. The siyum itself is completion for learning, and that you're happy that you've completed, and you hope to learn it again in the future in more depth.
So we need to complete the whole book?
Yeah, because a siyum is you're completing something, so it needs to be a full book. Okay.
So Shoftim is acceptable?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not the shortest, but there's a lot of exciting stuff in there. At the end is, near the end is about Shimshon, and there's these wars keep happening, so it should be, interesting enough. Like Yehoshua is a book too, but it's all this technical stuff of they went to this place and they shot this king, 30 however many times they killed this king, and then the borders of Eretz Yisrael. It's very technical, and that's boring. So Shoftim is just suggesting it. That's why I sent it out before last Shabbos, so people could get a head start on studying for the siyum. But it's still, for people, it's difficult. So we'll have a Zoom siyum if you can't do it yourself. So I will make a siyum on Gemara, and people could join on Zoom. Okay. On Wednesday, the last time you could eat chametz is 10:17. Prohibition to eat chametz begins at 10:18. And then because this year we have a 3-day yontif, Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbos, remember to make an erev tafshilin before candle lighting, or even in the afternoon on Wednesday, so that you can cook on Friday for Shabbos, or warm up food for Shabbos on Friday. Because normally we're not allowed to prepare from one day for another day, but because when yontif comes immediately after Shabbos, Chazal told us how we can do it, that it's okay by using an erev tafshilin. And then the Seder, we cannot start the first Seder before 7:50 p.m. The Afikomen, we have to finish by 12:52 a.m. Remember to recline when you're eating and drinking everything except the maror. You do not recline for the maror.
And then the second night, candle lighting is not before 8:08, I think it is, 8:08. So that's when you can start preparing for you can start setting your table then, and then as soon after that, as you're ready, you can start the second Hagaddah, the second Seder. And then because Friday, the second day of Yom Tov, goes into Shabbos, if you want to prepare your food for Shabbos, if you're, let's say, going to warm it up on the blach or in another way like that, so you would need to cook food for Shabbos because you left your oven on. So you made an erev tavshil, and then you could cook it. It all has to be in the oven, hopefully cooked already by 7:07, because 7:07 is candlelighting on Friday afternoon. And then after Shabbos, the Havdalah is a regular after Shabbos Havdalah with wine, spices, and candle. And then davening related points is that normally on the first day of Pesach we would say Tefillas Tal. We obviously are not going to have a minyan, unfortunately. So you would still say Mashiv Haruach at Musaf on Thursday, but then by Mincha time stop saying Mashiv Haruach. And then Cholamoid, we start saying the same bracha in Shmona Esrei. We stop saying the same Talamatuli bracha. So the first time that we would have that is Saturday night Marav, April 11th. So those, I think, are just halachos to be aware of for this upcoming Yom Tov. If anyone has any questions, please ask right now.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is there just not going to be Morid Hatal this year, or would it be when the next time a shul would have a minyan?
That is a good question. I think we're just not we're not going to do it this year.
Thank you.
So I think, I mean, now it would be a worse question if it was Sukkot time, because to start saying Mashiv Haruach, we actually have to ask Hashem. We need to do this procedure to start asking. And we do that in the summertime. Now that, in Israel, that was the beginning of the rainy season. Now that the rainy season is over, we don't really need a formal thing to stop. We can stop asking. But we have a special prayer that we thank Hashem and He should give us dew. I think it's probably based on Choni Amagel. With Choni Amagel, once there was a famine, a drought, and he davened. And it's a famous circle. He made the circle. He davened in it. He said, "I'm not leaving the circle until it rains." So then a few drops of rain fell. So to let him out of the circle, he said, "That's not what I need. Your children B'nai don't need rain." So Hashem made a tremendous rain, and it rained so much everything was flooding. So they said, "Daven for it to stop." And he said, "We don't ask Hashem to stop giving us something that's a bracha." So he eventually, so he said, bring a korban to thank Hashem for what He did. So we don't make a prayer that we're ending the asking for rain because the rainy season is over in Eretz Yisrael. But I guess along that idea for Choni, we say Hashem should bring dew in the way of thank you for all the rain you brought, and we look forward to the dew that you brought. We're not saying stop rain, but just we're not being critical, Chas v'shalom, or saying that we don't want any more of this bracha because the rain was a bracha there. So it's an interesting question. I didn't think about it or hear anyone who talked about it before. That's my reaction. But it would be a bigger shaila if we wouldn't be able to have tefillas geshem, I would guess, on Sukkos.
What about Iskar?
So we have time to tell you what to do for Yisker because that's the last days of Yom Tov. There obviously won't be Yisker and Shul. So you will obviously you won't say Kaddish, which is really not part of Yisker anyway, but you could say the paragraph at home even without a minyan.
Okay.
Or if not the paragraph, we could make a regular Kel Male because that doesn't have to be it. Well, I have to look into the fact, does Yisker have to be with a minyan? But if Yisker needs a minyan, then we could say a Kamale. Let me just. So there will be something we'll tell you what you'll need to do for Yisker, okay?
Okay.
Any other questions? I want to thank everyone for joining, and stay healthy. Have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. If you have any questions or shilas, just please ask. Okay.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Happy Passover, everybody.